Guys, Boxing Gossip here. Final instalment of a three-part series which ranks the top 30 heavyweights on the planet as of January 2017. Now, if you haven't already seen them, there's two parts 1 and part 2 to this series that have gone up on the channel in the last day or two. So if you haven't seen them and you'd like to check them out, those cover heavyweights 30 through to 21 in part 1 and 20 through to 11 in part 2. So I'd recommend checking those out before you sit down to watch this video. They're just on the main channel. But in this particular video, we're going to talk about the top 10 heavyweights on the planet as of today in January 2017 based on resume. So we're going to start with number 10. Number 10, Bryant Jennings, one of the forgotten men of the heavyweight division. And Bryant Jennings, again, is one of these fighters who, unfortunately and perhaps unfairly, is probably known for the nature of his losses. He lost, having performed with extreme credit, against Vladimir Klitschko, and he was then stopped by Luis Ortiz. But there's actually some very strong winning form on Bryant Jennings' resume. Jennings beat Mike Perez, who isn't rated in the top 30. I believe he is planning a comeback, so potentially has the scope to go back into it. But Mike Perez is a supremely talented fighter. And Jennings also beat Offa Spilka, who is rated in the top 30 at number 21. And I believe he actually knocked Spilka out with an uppercut, if memory serves. So that form, for me, for Bryant Jennings, brings him into the top 10, combined with the nature of his very respectable loss to Vladimir Klitschko, and I think he deserves very much to be in that top 10 fold. At number 9, a controversial figure, Lucas Browne. But as I've said in the parts leading up to this video, I'm not going to exclude a fighter who, as far as I'm aware, isn't retired, or as far as I'm aware, hasn't been banned from fighting. Now, I know Lucas Browne's failed a performance-enhancing drug test, but certainly prior to that, he put on a very, very good showing against Ruslan Chagayev. It was a career peak performance, and many people, including myself, thought he would struggle on that night against Ruslan Chagayev, but he boxed beautifully, and he won by stoppage. Chagayev, just as a matter of interest, would have made the top 20, let alone the top 30, but I do understand that he has actually retired from boxing, so as a result, he doesn't. As for Lucas Browne, we'll have to see what the future holds for him. Will he be banned? If so, he'll come off the list. Will he get active and get some big fights in 2017? If so, he's got the potential to feature very highly. Number 8, Kubrat Pulev. Pulev obviously lost to Vladimir Klitschko when he fought for the world title, but he's got some very, very good form on his resume. A good win over Tony Thompson, who I've got at number 17 in this list. A good win over Alexander Ustinov, who I've got at number 30. A very good win over Derek Chisora, who I've got at number 26. And other bits and pieces of form as well. He beat Alexander Dimitrenko in very good fashion, for example. So, off the basis of that, I've got Kubrat Pulev at number 8. Whether Pulev has the potential to become one of the elite of the heavyweight division, the world championship level figures, I question. But clearly, if he doesn't fall quite into that category of the elite of the heavyweight division, he is the very, very top of the next tier down. Which brings me neatly on to number 7. And just as a point of interest, at this point, 7 through to number 1, obviously, this is what I do personally consider to be the very, very top of the sport, the elite of the heavyweight division. And at number 7, I've got Anthony Joshua. Joshua deserves to be very, very well into the top 10 based on consistency of performance against ranked opposition. Molina, who made my top 30, Brazil, who made my top 30, Charles Martin, who made my top 30, Dillian White, who was in my top 20. Joshua put in performances against all of those individuals and won in very, very devastating fashion against the majority of them. The problem for me in terms of ranking Joshua higher than 7th at this point was, as it stands, the biggest name the highest ranked fighter on his resume was Dillian Whyte, who I had at number 18. And I found it hard to rank someone in the top 6, given some of the nature of the wins some other guys in the division had, when your top win was against Dillian Whyte, who was my number 18. Having said that, Joshua is fighting Vladimir Klitschko next, as we all know, and a win in that fight has the potential to move him right to the top of the heavyweight division as far as I'm concerned. So certainly one to watch, not there. At number 6, and I debated time and time again who to rank higher, Parker or Joshua, but I've got Parker at number 6. And just to reiterate, that isn't necessarily to say that I picked Parker to beat Joshua. It's to say that at this point, I believe Parker deserves to be ranked higher in terms of resume, because Parker has got a more convincing list of opponents. Carlos Takam, who I rated number 11. Andy Ruiz, who I rated number 14. As well as other names, respectable names, the likes of Dimitrenko, Kali Meehan, those sort of guys. I just edged to Joseph Parker on the basis primarily of those Takam and Ruiz wins. So for me, Joseph Parker deserves his place at number 6 in the list. At number 5, David Haye. Always unpopular whenever I do this, that David Haye is included. Clearly, it's very hard to make a case for him to be in the top 10, in the top 20, let alone the top 10, based on recent forms. Obviously, his most recent wins against Mark Demori and Arnold Jurjai are not inspiring form. He's due out to face Tony Bellew, a win there, which we expect he will do. Again, wouldn't be a win that would necessarily put you towards the top of the heavyweight division. But the reason I've got David Haye rated so highly is because of historic form. And David Haye's historic form, the likes of the wins against Nikolai Valuev, the likes of the wins against Ruiz, etc., for me, just pipped Joshua and Parker. I could accept an argument to have David Haye listed at number 7 or 8, and to side with the Joshuas and Parkers of this world because of the recent fights with Brazil, Molina. I could accept an argument of that nature. I think David Haye's a hard guy to list off the back of that, and it was really a toss-up what order to put. That sort of section of Haye, Parker, Joshua, maybe even Pulev. I changed my opinion on a few times, but overall, I went with David Haye just because I felt that historic form was very strong and was stronger. I know Valuev and Ruiz are no world beaters, but was certainly stronger than what had been achieved by the new breed of champion in Joshua and Parker. So I got David Haye at number 5. At number 4, and this will upset a few people because I know this is the person who a number of fighters consider their number 1. A number of viewers will consider their number 1. But at number 4, I've actually got Deontay Wilder. Wilder has fought a slightly better calibre of opposition for my money than the likes of an Anthony Joshua. Bermane Stavern, Malik Scott, Johan Duhaupas, Eric Molina, who was a mutual opponent. These are names that I think just slightly stack up higher in terms of their recent form. Where I struggled to rate Wilder much higher is I actually think that the best opponent he's beaten is Bermane Stavern still, who's number 12 in my list. So I don't think Deontay Wilder has beaten one of what I consider to be the current top 10 in boxing. And to be brutally honest, you could actually argue that his opponents are getting worse and worse. If you look at his performance against Bermane Stavern, and if you look at the opponents he's fought since then, it's actually a gradual reduction in terms of quality, culminating in his last fight against Chris Arreola and his next fight against, I won't even try and pronounce the guy's name. So Deontay Wilder I've got a number 4, one of the big talents of the sport, one of the big characters of the sport, and certainly someone who can compete for that number 1 spot. He just needs to fight more top 10 level opponents as far as I'm concerned. Number 3, Luis Ortiz. Now Ortiz hasn't looked good in his last 2 fights, but nevertheless he's secured wins over Bryant Jennings, he's secured wins over Tony Thompson, Malik Scott, etc. And I just felt that was just enough to edge him above Deontay Wilder, actually. I don't think Wilder has a single piece of form as impressive as Ortiz's victory over Bryant Jennings. And I don't think that was a one-hit wonder from Ortiz. You know, obviously there's a bank of comparable form, as I've already alluded to, with Tony Thompson, etc., Malik Scott. And even though he didn't look good in that Malik Scott fight, you know, he still won every round convincingly and dropped a guy multiple times who I've got rated in my top 15. So, yeah, I thought Ortiz definitely deserved to be number 3. At number 2, a controversial figure. But as I've said, even in this part of the video, I'm not going to exclude people for failing drug tests if they're still an active fighter in the sport. And someone who is an active fighter in the sport, because they fought only a week or two ago, is Alexander Povetkin. Now, Povetkin's resume is strong. Knockout wins over Perez, knockout wins over Takam, knockout win over Manuel Char, beating Mariusz Wach, going the distance with Klitschko, beating Chigayev. You know, I'm sure there's other recent form, you know, recent knockout of Johan Duhaupas in chilling fashion. Povetkin, for me, is the definite number 2 of active fighters in terms of quality of resume and quality of opposition. He's not someone I like. He's not someone I want to see succeed. He's someone who I feel behaved in very poor taste in his last fight. But regardless of my personal opinion, I don't think there's an argument to have Povetkin any lower than number 2. If you look at the depth of quality on his resume, you cannot make an argument that a Joshua, a Parker, a Wilder, an Ortiz has a stronger resume than Alexander Povetkin. So he's at number 2. No prizes for guessing who number 1 is. Vladimir Klitschko. Klitschko, prior to his loss to Tyson Fury, 10 years at the very, very top of the division. Beat some of the big names of the sport. He beat Alexander Povetkin, who's number 2 in this list. He beat Kubrat Pulev, who's number 8 in this list. He beat David Haye, who's number 5 in this list. There's no other heavyweight out there with that depth and quality. The loss to Tyson Fury will be a difficult one for Vladimir Klitschko to take, but he's bouncing back with a big fight against Anthony Joshua, who obviously is another world champion and towards the top of the heavyweight division. And it will be very, very, very interesting to see the result of that fight. I think there's a very strong argument to be made that with Tyson Fury away from the sport, currently in a period of retirement, that the winner of that fight, Vladimir Klitschko versus Anthony Joshua, is the number 1 active heavyweight in the sport. But right now, just on depth of resume, based on quality of wins, longevity, I think you've got to give Vladimir Klitschko the number 1 heavyweight in boxing. I want to know your thoughts on this list, guys. Do leave them in the comments section below. If you haven't already, please take the time to hit the subscribe button so you can check out my other stuff. And if you've enjoyed this series, and if you've enjoyed this video in particular, please hit the thumbs up button, which would help me out and support the channel massively. Thanks a lot for watching, and hope everyone's doing well.